A for loop is the most common type of loop in JavaScript. So here is an example of a for loop. You start with the keyword for, and then we have these parentheses with 3 different items in there separated by semicolons. The first thing is the initialization, then we have the condition, then we have the final expression. So the initialization happens before any of the code inside the loop runs. So we will start by initializing I to equal 0. So this is what most for loops start with, is you have a variable that you're going to initialize for the for loop. Then the next thing is the condition. So once this evaluates to false, we break out of the loop. So while I is less than 5, we'll continue to run through the loop over and over until this is false and we break out of the loop. The final thing is what we do at the end of each iteration. At the end of each iteration, we will increment I by 1. In this example, we are filling our array with the numbers 0 through 4. I'm going to do another example where we fill an array with the numbers 1 through 5. So we'll start with 4. Now we're going to initialize I to equal 1. We're starting with 1 instead of 0 this time, and we're going to do I is less than 6. So while I is less than 6, or until I is more than 6, we are going to run all the code in this loop. And at the end of each iteration, we are going to increment I. Now, I can just do what we had before. My array dot push I. So the final thing we will do is test this. I will do console.log and put my array inside here. And I'll just load this and see what we see in the console. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It worked. We iterated 5 different times, and each time we pushed a new digit onto the array, and at the end of each iteration, we incremented I, so it pushed a larger number onto the array. Loops don't just have to increment one at a time. Look at this for loop here. We have our initialization where we initialize I to 0, and then we are going to run the loop until I is less than 10. And finally, our increment, instead of incrementing I by 1, we're incrementing I by 2. So now this is going to push all the even numbers onto the array. We have console.log, so let's log it out and see what it looks like. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm going to write another loop right now that creates an array of odd numbers. So let's do that. For var I equals 1, we'll start at 1. While I is less than 10, I can use 10 again. I'm going to do I plus equal 2. So we're still going to skip count by 2's, but since we're starting at 1 instead of 0, this should give us the odd numbers. So let's see what's going to be inside our loop. My array dot push, and I'll just put I there. So let's log this out and see if we did it right. Console.log my array, and I'll run that. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It worked. A for loop can also be used to count backwards. So if we see this for loop here, we're initializing I to 10. We're starting at 10 and we're going back to 0. So we're going to iterate through this loop while I is more than 0. We're going to keep iterating. And at the end of each iteration, we're going to decrement I instead of increment it. We're going to go down by 2. I minus equals 2 means I equals I minus 2. So we're going to continue pushing the lower and lower numbers onto the array until I is less than 0. So let's log this out and see what our array becomes. You can see 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. Well, I'm going to write another one where we're going to push the odd numbers from 9 through 1 to my array. So another for loop, and I'm going to do var I equals 9 because we want to start at 9. Now we'll still do I is more than 0. So while I is more than 0, we're going to keep going through this array, and we'll do I, and everything else is really the same. Minus equals 2. And this is going to get all the odd numbers onto the array. So we just have to do my array dot push and then push on the I there. Now we'll just console.log so we can see what it ended up as. My array, and I'll run the code. 97531. We did it. It is common in JavaScript to iterate through the contents of an array. So look at this example. We have this array here. Before, we were always adding items to the array, but this time the array already exists. Right here, our array 9, 10, 11, 12. So we are going to start at 0, but now, instead of going to a specific number of iterations, we're going to the rArray.length. So the length is 4 here, but if we added elements to this array, that means this loop would just go even longer until we went through every element of that array. And then at the end, we're going to increment I by 1 at the end of each iteration. So look what we're doing inside the array. We're doing our total that starts off at 0 up here, and we're doing plus equals. That means we're going to do our total equals our total plus something else. So we're going to keep adding to the total whatever is in the array at that index. So our array I. So it starts at 0 and then it goes 1, 2, 3 until it gets to 4, which is the length of the array, and it doesn't even run the iteration at 4, and there is no index 4 on the array. Remember, it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is just going to add up all those numbers. If we run this, we can see it adds up to 42. I'm going to write another for loop down here that's going to add up all the numbers in this array here. So we'll do for var I equals 0, and then we'll do I is less than my array dot length and I plus plus. So just like before, for each element in my array, we're going to do a total plus equals my array index I. So we have to initialize the total variable right up here. So we'll do var total equals 0. And then at the end, we'll just console.log that out to see what the total is. So if I just run this, we can see that the total this time is 20.